I saw my sister's name on my husband's phone at 2:07 a.m., lit up like a match in the dark. The screen was face up on the nightstand because he'd fallen asleep reading headlines, his breathing already in that slow, heavy rhythm that says, deep sleep, impossible honesty. The vibration was a mosquito buzz against the wood. I didn't plan to touch it. I didn't plan to read anything. I planned to flip it over and go back to counting the distance between thunder and lightning outside our window. But the preview line was bright and simple and wrong. Can't stop thinking about last night. My finger didn't ask permission. I opened the thread. Green and gray bubbles stacked up like a record of a life I didn't know, typed in the language of shared jokes that didn't belong to me. A photo I couldn't expand properly, just a fragment, a corner of a blue sleeve that looked like the denim jacket my sister wore to every family barbecue. Timestamps that spanned weeks, not days. You still up? Did she say anything? Please don't ghost me. And then, I went too far. I locked the phone. It was heavier than my hand and warm from his skin. I stared at the ceiling and felt the truth choose me the way a storm chooses a hilltop. I had two choices: wake him or watch him. I chose the second. I lay in the dark counting his breaths and the seconds between them, cataloging the small domestic noises of our home in Asheville, the old refrigerator's shudder, the distant train on the French Broad River, the rain on our gutter that our neighbor promised to fix and never did. And I felt the house around me tilt, as if gravity had shifted to some new center I could not yet name. By the time dawn burned a thin line along our blinds, my mind was already placing markers on a map. My sister, my husband, last night, and a promise I didn't remember giving. What else had moved in my house while I slept?
I am 33, a museum registrar who knows how to keep track of fragile things. My job is to log provenance and movement, who touched what, when, where it went, whether it came back the same. I like paperwork. I like boxes with white gloves and black ink. I like order so much that when Ethan and I got married 3 years ago, I made a spreadsheet of every thank you note we wrote, as if gratitude could be curated. Part of me thought marriage would be a museum, quiet, climate-controlled, each piece labeled and respected. It isn't like that. Marriage is a living exhibit. The air changes it. My sister Mara is 31, the opposite of climate control. She is the kind of person who opens windows in winter. She paints her nails while waiting for water to boil and always smudges one finger and never minds. When we were kids in Savannah, she jumped fences to cut through to the corner store and charmed free popsicles out of the clerk with a grin. I followed rules, she found shortcuts. We learned to survive our parents' quiet wars in different ways. I organized, Mara improvised. Ethan fits somewhere between us. He is a construction estimator who can turn a stack of blueprints into a budget. He reads the weather like a farmer. He loves our creaky bungalow and our sunrise hikes on the Blue Ridge Parkway and the sourdough starter he named Arlo. He's practical to the bone and kind in ways that often go unnoticed, which is another form of practicality. Mara moved to Asheville a year ago, just for a while, after a breakup left her orbiting nowhere. She rented a studio above a bakery and took a job waiting tables at a place with brick walls and Edison bulbs. She'd stop by with a bag of day-old croissants and new gossip about cooks and customers, always with a shrug that said, "Life is ridiculous and I'm surviving it." I liked that she was 10 minutes away after years of scattered distances. I liked that Ethan and Mara got along. I told myself it was good to have the three of us, a small constellation, close enough to share dinners and car troubles and the occasional borrowed ladder. That story felt clean until 2:07 a.m., when it changed temperature in my hands. I tried not to think of the time Mara called Ethan last fall when her radiator died and he went to fix it because I had a late-night inventory audit and couldn't. I tried not to think of their running joke about my exhibit voice, the careful tone I use when explaining policies, because teasing is what family does. I tried not to think of Mara hugging Ethan in the kitchen on Christmas after he surprised her with snow tires. I tried not to think of how she whispered, "You're the best," into his shoulder, and how his hands hovered a second too long in that uncertain space between polite and something else. The problem with being a registrar is that you remember every transfer. The problem with being a sister is that you think you're exempt. Why did that message feel like a label on a box I'd never seen? I told no one. I went to work and counted frames and seals and signatures while my mind ran two tracks, my face nodding at donors as if I wasn't replaying green text bubbles behind my eyes. At lunch, I sat alone in my car behind the museum, where the smell of damp leaves always hung low between the oak and the loading dock, and I scrolled. I'd never gone through Ethan's phone in our entire relationship. His passcode was his mother's birthday because he thought that was secure enough. He trusted me not to use it. I trusted him not to make me want to. I watched him in the morning shower, felt the steam migrate under the door like a ghost, and typed the numbers anyway. The thread started 5 months ago. The first messages were innocuous. Hey, you busy? Can you help me understand my lease? How much do mechanics lie? Then photos, her sink cabinet in a leak, her car's dashboard, a sticker from a band I didn't know. Slowly the tone shifted. You're easy to talk to. Don't tell her, okay? She has enough on her mind. Then a school of fish, late-night pings, fast responses, missing vowels, an intimacy of speed that belonged to a new secret language. You get me. Promise me you won't judge. Please keep this between us. I was the her. I was the one with enough on her mind. I scrolled faster. A video of Mara's empty apartment, a pan across a bare bookshelf, an open window, wind chimes. A photo of a hand, I recognized her ring, touching a cedar beam in a half-built addition, Ethan's most recent project, the hand anchoring itself to the raw wood as if pledging allegiance. Then, 3 weeks ago, I messed up. With who? He wrote. Come by? He didn't answer that. He wrote, what do you need? You. The next morning's message, sent at 5:31 a.m., was the one from the preview. I went too far. His reply, we'll figure it out. She wrote, I hate myself. He wrote, don't. Lightning counted off over the mountains while I read. I tried to be rational. We'll figure it out could mean anything. Maybe she borrowed money. Maybe she signed a terrible lease. Maybe this was about a bartender she shouldn't have trusted or a landlord who threatened to sue. Maybe last night had nothing to do with love. That hope was a thin thread stretched between two cliffs, and I could hear it sing. I scrolled to the bottom. Another ping at 2:07 a.m., the one that woke me, can't stop thinking about last night. And then, just before my thumb hit the lock button, a new message landed. I'll do whatever you say. Ethan never replied on screen, but when he came out of the shower that morning, his hair wet and his face red from the heat, he kissed my head and said, Arlo's hungry, the way a man says something easy before he walks into something hard. I closed the messages, blocked the phone, swallowed the taste of metal at the back of my throat, and decided to treat my life the only way I know how, like a collection with a gap in its record. Provenance lost, objects mislabeled, truth hiding in acid-free tissue. To find what was missing, I would have to trace every hand that touched it. What exactly had my sister asked my husband to hold? When you start looking for signs, the world obliges. Ethan had a new habit of stepping outside to take calls, of re-entering with a neutral face that said spam without saying it. Mara had a new habit of arriving with errands for him, help me with a shelf, with a faucet, with a stuck window pulley. Always phrased as if I would laugh at her for asking, always oh so reluctant. I told myself I was generous. I told myself I was modern. I told myself there is nothing wrong with my husband knowing how to fix things and my system knowing how to ask. But my eyes caught 100 little transfers of weight between them. The way Ethan set down his coffee when Mara texted. The way Mara's voice dropped a half step when Ethan said her name. I cataloged tone. I measured pauses. I watched the space between their feet when they stood in our kitchen. I took measurements because that is what I do when something is shifting. It's a reflex from childhood, born from listening to my parents argue 2 rooms away, my father's hard, quiet voice, my mother's brittle calm, learning how to predict a storm by the pollen in the air. In the museum archives, I pulled a crate and tried to read the label, but my mind swapped the words. Paintings, 1940s, tempera on board, became messages, summer, regrets on phones. A colleague asked if I wanted coffee, and I said, yes, but no dairy, as if milk could curdle the truth. That Friday, Ethan claimed he had a late bid meeting. He kissed my cheek on the way out. The kiss hit like an apology delivered early. I told him to drive safe. He nodded the way you nod when there's nothing else you can safely say. 10 minutes later, I watched his blue Tacoma take a left on Charlotte Street at an hour when meetings end, not begin. I followed, 2 cars back, the rim of my steering wheel digging a semicircle into my palms. Asheville's Friday evening spread itself out. Couples on patios, teenagers with skateboards in Pack Square, a busker with a violin bending the air into something that hurt. The sky was pink in the complicated way it gets over the mountains, like bruised peaches. Ethan turned onto a narrow side street near the bakery beneath Mara's building. He parallel parked with surgical care, shoulders squared, then vanished into the alley. I didn't follow him into the alley because I knew how that movie goes, the woman who runs toward the scream instead of away, and because I didn't want to know yet if the world had already changed irrevocably. I parked and counted the cracks in the sidewalk. I counted the steps I didn't take. I counted the seconds until he returned. He emerged 7 minutes later with a gym bag I knew wasn't his. It was Mara's old canvas duffel with a frayed strap, a yellow thread sticking out like a loose stitch in a wound. He slung it into the passenger seat and drove away, and I followed him in the opposite direction of any office building, toward the edge of town, toward the storage facility off Patton where we once rented a unit when we first moved and needed a safe place for our excess life. He keyed in a code I didn't have. He disappeared with the duffel. He returned without it. When the metal date shut behind his truck, it sounded like a verdict. I sat in my car and watched the digits of the keypad blink back to 0 and felt something in me do the same. If I was careful, I could still catalog this. If I moved too fast, I might break it. What was in the bag that had to be stashed where my keycard no longer worked?
The weekend was a performance. We cooked pancakes, watered tomatoes, folded towels. Ethan asked about a new exhibit, as if the word new didn't burn my mouth. Mara didn't text all Saturday, which felt strategic, the way a pause in a song makes the next note hit harder. I tested the ground by saying I might invite her over for dinner on Sunday. Ethan said, sure, in a voice an octave too casual. When I did invite her, she replied, can't, double shift, rain check? Rain check. The phrase felt obscene with the windows open and a summer storm rolling in. I baked anyway. Something to do with my hands. I made a lemon loaf I knew she liked and pretended it was for us. I put it in the freezer for later, as if later would behave itself and wait. On Sunday night, rain hammered the porch roof, and we sat on the sofa half watching a documentary about bridges. Arches and girders filled the screen, structures built to carry weight from one side to another without collapsing. Engineers spoke in calm voices about stress and load and failure points. One said, if you don't build for the strain you can't see, the strain you can't see will find you. Ethan's hand rested on my ankle, a casual weight that used to feel like home. Now it felt like a surveyor's stake driven into ground that might not be mine. I curled my toes under and pulled my feet slightly away as if I needed to stretch. He didn't follow. When the credits rolled, Ethan stood, stretched, and said he'd brush his teeth. I stared at the screensaver, an endless loop of a pale blue jellyfish drifting inside a dark ocean. No bones, no scream, just a pulse. In the mirror, as I washed my face, I studied myself the way I study a damaged frame. I have my mother's mouth and my father's eyebrows, and a small white scar at my hairline from when I fell off a bike at 6. The scar is a webbed crescent that only shows when I pull my hair back tight. I had the impulse to pull my hair back until my scalp stung, just to feel something I could control. That night in bed, Ethan rolled toward me in the dark and slid a hand under my shirt, a familiar question. I turned into him and let the rhythm take over. Quick, muted, a wordless bargain you make in the dark to buy yourself a few hours of silence. I held my breath at the end and thought of bridges, of unseen strain, of how sometimes the weight gives way all at once, sometimes it gives way by degrees, a hairline crack lengthening in slow motion until it becomes the only thing you can see. In the hush after, he whispered into my hair, "You okay?" I said, "Long week." It was true and spectacularly insufficient. He kissed the back of my shoulder in a way that used to feel like a promise. It felt like a postscript. If he was going to tell me, he would have told me. If she was going to stop, she would have stopped. What exactly were they waiting for me to do? Monday morning, I did something I'm not proud of. I took a personal day, called Mara's restaurant, and told the manager I was her sister and there was a family emergency. I still don't know if I meant the emergency we already had or the one I planned to create.
Either way, Mara didn't go to work. She texted Ethan at 10:04 a.m. "Can you swing by?" At 10:05 a.m., she texted me, "You busy? Need a favor?" I typed, "At work, what's up?" Then put my phone face down and stared at it until the screen went black. I drove to the storage facility. I sat across the road with a clear view of the gate. I brought a clipboard and a legal pad because that's what I do when I'm about to cross a line. I disguise it as a task. At 10:37, Ethan's truck turned in. At 10:41, Mara's small black Civic followed. They didn't arrive together. I wrote that down as if it mattered, as if arriving separately could camouflage arriving at all. The gate swallowed them both. 20 minutes later, the Civic exited first. Mara drove with both hands on the wheel, chin tucked, as if practicing contrition. She didn't glance left or right. The truck followed 5 minutes later. Ethan looked straight ahead, jaw set, radio off. Or maybe I only imagined the silence. When the road was clear, I pulled in behind a commercial van, took a deep breath that tasted like dust and old rubber, and tailgated through as the security arm rose. It felt like slipping into a museum gallery after hours with a borrowed badge. My hands shook, not from fear of being caught by staff, but from fear that whatever I found would reclassify my entire collection as counterfeit. Storage units have a way of making everything look like evidence. Rows of corrugated doors, numbers with no names. The unit Mara used last year had been 3C. The one we had, long closed, was 8A. I drove slowly past 3C just to see. The lock was different, a new brass cylinder that looked expensive. I parked 2 rows away and walked, my nonchalance slipping around my shoulders like a coat I didn't own. I had no plan for the lock. I had a plan for listening. The row was quiet, the air thick with the metallic smell of accumulated summers. I heard the distant hum of a vending machine near the office and the soft, sticky sound of my own soles peeling off the concrete. Then a door scraped open ahead, 8A, the unit Ethan and I had once used. I ducked behind a column and watched Ethan tug down the corrugated door halfway and slip under. I couldn't see inside, only a triangle of dimness that swallowed him. A moment later, a second silhouette crouched and disappeared into the same wedge of shadow. Mara. I wanted to run toward them and scream. I wanted to run away and forget the code. I did neither. I stood still, every sense straining forward like a deer on a suburban lawn. Muffled voices, the scritch of a box sliding across cement, a small laugh, hers. I would have recognized it in a hurricane. Then silence, a long one, the kind that could hold anything. When they emerged, they didn't touch. Ethan latched the lock. Mara tucked hair behind her ear with the same nervous knuckles she'd chewed as a child. She walked one way, he walked the other. It was choreography, not affection, but it was still choreography. I waited until they were gone. I waited longer than made sense. Then I walked up to 8A and put my palm flat on the cold ripple of the door like I was consoling an animal. The brass lock was new. The dust along the floor showed fresh scuffs where boxes had been dragged. I knelt and peered through the small gap between the door and the concrete, just enough to see a slice of inside, a tower of banker's boxes, a rolled rug, a silver rectangle that could be a frame or a mirror, and on the nearest box, my own handprint in dust from a day 3 years earlier when Ethan and I had stacked our excess life there. My history touched their secret. The sight was so on the nose, I nearly laughed. I didn't. I walked back to my car with legs that didn't belong to me and stared at the steering wheel until the clock changed. Whatever this was, it wasn't just new. It had roots in something we already owned. What had they found in the dark that I had labeled wrong in the light? I changed tactics. I stopped looking for proof of an affair and started looking for context. Affairs are simple and brutal. Context is complicated and often worse. At home that night, I asked Ethan about the storage unit like a person who didn't already know. "Did you ever close out 8A?" He didn't flinch. Months ago. Strange, I said, rinsing a plate. Got an email from the facility about a promotional rate. I thought they only send those to active renters. He dried a glass with a towel that had a faint lemon stain. We're not on the list anymore. Must be a mass email. You know how they are. I let it go, out loud. I didn't let it go in my head. After he fell asleep, I opened our file cabinet. We have a folder for everything: house, cars, insurance, taxes, MISC. In MISC, I found a manila envelope labeled storage in my handwriting. Inside, 3 old invoices, 1 signed closure form. No new contract, no indication that anyone, including my husband or my sister, had reopened 8A with a code that wasn't mine. The next day, I visited the facility office and smiled at the manager, a woman with a clump of keys that jingled like a threat. I told her I needed to retrieve paperwork we'd misfiled. I told her numbers I remembered, dates that were true. I told her a soft lie about identity theft because lies go down easier when they sound like public service announcements. She raised an eyebrow, checked the screen, and told me our old unit was closed and reassigned. To who? I asked, feigning casual interest. I can't share that, she said. Privacy. Of course, I said, and tilted my head in a way that used to make teachers lower their voice. I wouldn't want my sister's name floating around either. The manager looked back at the screen, and in the reflection on her reading glasses, I caught a flicker of letters, M-R, before she shifted and the angle changed. Enough. Not proof. Enough. I didn't ask for the code. I didn't have to. On the counter, laminated for customer convenience, was a list of common lock issues with sample lock images and the number of emergency locksmith the facility partnered with. I knew their markup would be vicious. I also knew which locksmith would come if a lock failed and a renter couldn't reach the manager. I went home and waited until the time of day when Mara wouldn't be there. At 2:26 p.m., according to the online schedule I could see if I pretended to be a customer, she was mid-shift. I drove to the unit with a bag of not quite legal intentions, stared at the brass lock like it owed me money, and called the locksmith. I told him I was on a job for 8A. I said Ethan, like a man would, brisk, apologetic, confident. He said, be there in 10, because this is a country where confidence is a key. When he arrived, I let him talk. He told me weather was hell on locks. He told me this model sticks if you over-torque it. He told me his daughter loved the museum's winter lights. I asked him about the new employees at the facility, and he told me they never lasted. He had opinions about everything, which meant he already knew who I was. He clipped the lock with a speed that suggested long practice. He replaced it with a twin. He handed me a key and said, "Don't tell the office I gave you a spare," then laughed at his own joke. He left in a cloud of assurance and engine noise. I stood facing 8A, the new key in my palm like a small, hot coin. I opened the door. Inside, it smelled like cardboard and old summer. The geometry of boxes made small valleys and mountains. Someone had draped a sheet over a couch I recognized from our first apartment in Asheville, a secondhand green monster we'd given to charity when we moved. So not everything in here was new. On the back wall, stacked 3 high, were the banker's boxes I'd glimpsed through the gap. They were labeled in my handwriting: mother, kitchen, mother, photos, mother, papers. My chest went hollow. The mother boxes were from Savannah, the ones we packed after the hostess, after the lawyer, after the last argument about the house. We had split things fairly, by spreadsheet, by tiers. I had taken paperwork because I could bear it. Mara had taken the art and jewelry because she said she couldn't bear the rest. We had agreed that if any box felt too heavy for one of us later, we would say so and swap. We meant it when we said it. We just hadn't anticipated later would look like this. On a waist-high stack sat the canvas duffel with the frayed strap. It was half-zipped. Inside was a shoebox tied with twine, a Ziploc full of cash, a plastic file folder with colored tabs, and a scuffed composition notebook with electric blue edges. I am not a thief. I am a curator with a key. I unzipped the duffel because it was already unzipped, and because my hands were already dirty. The cash was mostly 20s, folded in loose stacks. The file folder held photocopies, leases, pay stubs, and a page that made my stomach do a slow, mean flip. A surgical consent form with Mara's name at the top and a line 3/4 down that read, "Termination of pregnancy." Dated 3 weeks ago. I did not know Mara was pregnant. I did not know she had not been. The empty space between those two facts rang like a dropped bell. I opened the composition notebook last because notebooks can hold a person's exact temperature. The first page was a list of numbers and days, tips, shifts, totals. The second page was a list of LOs, KOs, and M. The third was a letter that wasn't addressed to anyone. It began, "I didn't plan this." It continued, "He kissed me first." It ended, "I will fix it." I didn't need her to write the name. I wasn't a detective anymore. I was a sister who now knew the shape of the thing that had been pressing against her life in the dark. I put the notebook back, I zipped the duffel, I unlabeled my face and walked backwards out of the unit as if something inside might bite. The key in my palm felt heavier than it had a minute ago. I relatched the door with care, as if good manners could reverse trespass. My mother's boxes, my sister's decision, my husband's silence. There was a difference between betrayal and calamity. Sometimes they live in the same room and share a toothbrush. What exactly had they promised each other that I wasn't allowed to hear?
I thought Ethan would tell me that night because there was no longer anything left to protect. He didn't. He asked about my day as if there was a script and he was committed to hitting his marks. He made pasta with garlic and lemon and parsley and set a plate in front of me like an alibi. I wanted to throw the plate. I wanted to eat it quietly and wait. I did the second thing. After he washed, I dried. The rhythm was a metronome that once comforted me. Now every clink of ceramic felt like a countdown. I said, "Mara texted about grabbing coffee tomorrow." He said, too quickly, "Nice." I said, "She seemed tired." He said, "She's working a lot." I said, "You'd tell me if something was wrong, right?" He paused a fraction of a second too long. "Of course." It wasn't a lie so much as a duct tape repair. I nodded and said I had paperwork to finish. In my office, I stared at the glow of my screen and tried to draft an email and instead typed words that belonged to someone else. Consent, termination, silence. I deleted them. I listened to Ethan's footsteps move through our small house, bathroom, living room, kitchen, bedroom, as if mapping terrain I might have to abandon. At midnight, I texted Mara, "We need to talk." She replied immediately, "Can't. Tomorrow?" I typed, "No. Now." A long pause. Then, "You know?" I wrote, "Enough." Another long pause. Then, "I'm sorry." The next bubble began and stopped 3 times before it landed. It wasn't what you think. I stared until the words blurred. "What do I think?" I wrote. She didn't answer. She sent a location ping instead. The overlook on Town Mountain Road, where kids go to kiss and adults go to breathe. I drove without turning on the radio. The mountain road curled like a question of its own. It was after 1 on a weekday. The overlook was empty except for a trash can and a bench that needed repainting. The city below looked like a circuit board, neat lights connected by dark lines, an illusion of order held together by current you can't see. Mara stood by the railing in a hoodie and jeans, hair up, face pale in the sodium glow. She looked younger than 2 hours ago and older than last month. She folded her arms when I approached and then unfolded them and shoved her hands in her pockets instead, looking for a posture that told the right story. "Hey," she said, as if we were meeting for ice cream. I said nothing. I waited. She's always hated silence. She fills it by tripping over truth on her way to comfort. She looked at me, then away. She said, "I was pregnant." And when I didn't react, she added, It wasn't planned." "With Ethan?"
I asked, because surgery requires precision. No, she said quickly, eyes wide with hurt I couldn't parse. God, no, not Ethan. I swear. I swear on Mom's. She cut off before saying grave, as if the word might summon our mother's voice to slap her. No, she said again. A bartender. Liam. Stupid. And then she swallowed. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to look at me like that. Like what? She said, like you're cataloging my bad decisions for a future exhibit. The line should have made me laugh. It didn't. Why were you texting my husband at 2 a.m. about last night? She put a hand to her forehead, then dropped it. Because I did a stupid thing, she said. And there it was, the tone children use when they accidentally break the good bowl. I kissed him. I was scared the night before the appointment and I asked him to come over because you were doing inventory, and I didn't want to be alone. And we were sitting on my floor and I cried, and he put his arm around me. And I kissed him. He pulled back. He said, "This isn't how we do this." And then he held my hand like a brother and he drove me at 5 a.m. so I wouldn't have to Uber. And then he sat in the parking lot until they let me out and he drove me home. And I slept. That's what last night was. Stupid and desperate and not what I wanted it to be once it was happening. Once it was happening, I repeated, as if echoing could make it smaller. And you both decided not to tell me because? Because I asked him not to, she said, voice small and stubborn at once. Because I thought you'd make it about you. About me? About how your husband is perfect and my life is messy and you have order and I have chaos and Mom would have said, she clamped her jaw like the thought tasted bad. Because I didn't want to be the bad sister again. Because I didn't want to be a reason for you to doubt the one good thing that works the way it's supposed to. The mountain wind moved through us. Below, a siren wailed and faded. I felt my anger rearrange itself, not disappearing, but changing shape, like metal cooling into a new form. I said, "You kissed my husband." She said, "I know," and the words sounded like a bruise when you press it. "I'm sorry." And he didn't tell me. She said, "I asked him not to." Again, as if the request could absolve him, as if my marriage was hers to curate by proxy. I told him I would, then I didn't. Why the storage unit? Her shoulders hunched. I didn't want this in my apartment. The boxes, everything. I wanted a place to put it that wasn't where I slept. He helped me because you wouldn't have approved. I'm right. I don't approve. She flinched like I lifted a hand. I'm sorry, she said one more time, and the words felt worn out from use. There is a limit to how much truth a night can hold. We had reached the end of ours. I turned without hugging her. I got in my car and put my forehead against the steering wheel until the cool leather made a small red moon on my skin. If Ethan was the man she described, the man who pulled back, who held a hand, who waited in a parking lot, who hid the worst part of a story to spare someone else, he had still stepped into a secret that belonged to me. If Mara was the woman she described, the woman who slipped and caught herself on a man who wasn't hers because she was scared, she had still chosen my husband as a handhold. Which betrayal was larger, the one with intent or the one with omission?
I am not good at screaming. I am good at staging. If you can't confront people in the moment they wound you, you can make a room into a witness. I invited them both to dinner, early, on a Thursday, under the pretext of something soft. I found some of Mom's recipes in a box and thought we could try one. Ethan said yes with relief. Mara said yes with dread. I made my mother's chicken and rice because grief cooks itself into that dish, and because it fills the house with a smell that insists this is a home. I set the table with the wedding china we never use and the blue napkins my aunt embroidered with our initials. I chose the seat at the head because I needed an angle where I could see both faces at once. I placed 3 objects in the center like exhibits in a case: the canvas duffel, the composition notebook, and the brass lock. They sat where the flowers should go. I didn't add flowers. When they arrived, they smelled the chicken and relaxed for a fraction of a second. Then they saw the centerpiece. Ethan went still,
his eyes flicking from object to my face. Mara touched the back of a chair as if to check whether wood still felt like wood. "We're going to eat first," I said, because hunger makes monsters of us, and I needed everyone human. We ate. Or rather, we moved food around. The rhythm of fork to plate was ridiculous under the circumstances, but forks move whether you deserve them or not. When the plates were messy enough to pass for done, I folded my napkin into a small square and placed it to the left of my plate with a neatness that felt like a threat. "Let's begin," I said in my exhibit voice before I could stop myself. "Mara, you first." She placed both hands on the table and told the story she had told me on the mountain. She cried once, not dramatically, not strategically, just once, on the line where she said she had not wanted to be alone in the waiting room. When she finished, she looked at Ethan like he was a clipboard and she needed a signature. Ethan nodded once, slow, and turned to me. "She's telling the truth," he said. "I should have told you. I made a bad choice trying to make a good one." "What was the good one?" I asked, and hated that my voice wasn't steady. "To spare you pain you didn't need," he said. "To honor her privacy when she asked for it. To not make her feel like she was one more exhibit in a life that's already cataloged her as a cautionary tale." "Don't use my words against me," I said, heat rising, "because there is nothing like having your own judgments come home to roost." "I'm not," he said, softer. "I'm telling you why I failed you." "And why did you let her kiss you?" I asked. He looked at his hands, then at me. "Because I was there. Because she was hurting. Because I am a man and men like to think comfort is the same as solution. Because I am not 20. Because as soon as it happened, I knew I would have to choose between telling you and respecting a plea for secrecy I didn't agree with but felt bound by. There are words that break the skin more cleanly than a knife. Bound by. Who had bound him? Mara's fear? His own pride? My tendency to curate? All of the above. I breathed in the smell of cinnamon from the rice and wished it were any other spice. I picked up the brass lock and set it gently back down. "You kept a secret with my sister, in the place we once kept our overflow," he said. "I know." I looked at Mara. "And you let my husband be the one you reached for." "I know," she said. Shame ignited her face. "Why me?" Ethan asked. "Why not me?" I asked at the same time. We almost smiled. We didn't. "I thought you'd judge me," Mara said. And there it was again, the ancient blade. "I thought you'd make me choose a better version of myself when all I had was the bad one." "I do that," I said, "because confession is cheaper than denial. I curate. I edit. I make boxes behave." "I should have told you anyway," Ethan said. "I'm sorry." The words were stripped of performance. They landed with weight. "I know," I said. "Because I did. And knowing didn't fix it." We sat long enough for the room to notice. The overhead light hummed. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked at a squirrel. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed, a sound that made no sense in our house. "What do you need?" Ethan asked, finally. I looked at him, then at Mara, then at the duffel. The answer had been building for days, but I waited for it to be a full sentence in my head before I spoke it out loud. "I need a boundary. A real one. Not a lock on a door I don't have access to. Not a promise made without me in a parking lot at dawn. I need time away from both of you to decide what's salvageable. I need you, Ethan, to sleep at your brother's for a while. I need you, Mara, to give me the key to your unit and permission to return our mother's boxes to me, because I cannot be the woman who knows her past is warehoused with her sister's secrets." Mara nodded through tears. "Of course," she said. Ethan closed his eyes and opened them. "Okay," he said, and he meant it, which hurt in a new and specific way. "And one more thing," I added, because plans require details. "We will not let this rot in silence. In 2 weeks, we will meet in a counselor's office. I have already called 3. I will make an appointment with the one that doesn't have a 6-month wait list. We will not weaponize vagueness. We will either rebuild or we will unpack carefully and walk away with minimum breakage. Ethan nodded once. Mara nodded twice, fast, like she might shatter if she stopped. Deal, I said. And the word sounded ridiculous for the size of what it was asked to hold. If I was staging this, I was also standing inside it. Could I be both curator and subject without tearing the canvas?
We didn't clear the plates right away. We let them sit like a tableau of the life we had just presented as evidence. I handed Mara the duffel. She didn't touch the cash. She took the notebook and slid it inside, as if closing the book might change what had already been written. I placed the brass lock on top. She flinched and then smoothed the canvas over it, as if tucking a child into bed. "I'll get you the key tomorrow," she said. "To the unit, to my place if you want it, to anything that has a door." "I don't want your apartment key," I said. "I want your honesty. The key is just a shape." Ethan stood and gathered his jacket like a man leaving a hospital room after bad news, but before the worst. He didn't kiss me. He didn't reach for my shoulder. He looked at me as if I were a piece of art he loved and wasn't sure he had the right to hang in his house anymore. "I'll pack a bag," he said. "I'll text you the counselor choices." "Email," I said, because I am petty when I'm hurt, "so I can print them." He half smiled despite everything. "Email," he agreed. He turned to Mara. "Are you okay?" She almost laughed, a dry sound, not remotely. "Good," he said, and the word was raw. "You shouldn't be." After they left, I washed the dishes because motion keeps a body from collapsing. I scrubbed the pot until my wrist ached. I dried the plates with the blue napkins because I had run out of towels and because I wanted to mar something tidy. I put the china back in its foam sleeves. I turned off the oven light. I touched the table where the duffel had been and felt the ghost weight of it. In bed, alone, I lay on my back and counted the seconds it took for the refrigerator to shutter. 11, then 9, then 11 again. The house made night noises and no other ones. The next morning, I made coffee for one and drank it on the porch, while the neighborhood rearranged itself for a new day. There is a clarity that comes after a storm, the way leaves look individually instead of as a mass. I watched each leaf declare itself. At work, I walked through galleries and felt the air kissing the frames the way it always does, the conditioned hush that keeps paintings from breathing too fast. I stopped in front of a landscape I've loved since it arrived, the blue ridge rendered in the near impossible blue that is both distance and closeness at once. The placard reads, "Oil on canvas, 1951. As if that contains it. It does not. That painting holds an entire afternoon's weather from 74 years ago. A family fought that day. A couple forgave each other. A woman like me looked at a mountain and thought of another life. At lunch, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I texted my friend Talia and wrote, "Can I tell you something I don't want to be true?" She answered, "All ears, all heart, tell me." So I did. I told it in clean lines and unsparing angles. She wrote back the thing I didn't know I needed. "You're not crazy. You're also not obligated to be the most gracious woman in the room while you bleed." That night, at my request, Mara brought the unit key. She handed it over on the porch, eyes red, nose raw, hoodie up against a chill that didn't exist. I put Mom's boxes against the left wall. I kept the art from her bedroom at my place. I couldn't. I didn't want it near. "I'm sorry." "I'll get the boxes this weekend," I said. "Because tasks are mercy." "I'm getting on a wait list," she blurted, "for counseling, separately. I should have years ago. I used your steadiness like a crutch and then resented you for it. I'm done doing that. I don't want to be the messy sister who ruins the good sister's life." "I'm not the good sister," I said quietly. "I'm the tidy one. That isn't the same thing."
She half smiled as if a truth had been named and therefore could be survived. "I love you," she said. "I love you." It was true, which didn't make it easier. When she left, I stood in the doorway longer than the temperature warranted and let the night air right on my skin. I slept badly and woke with my jaw sore from clenching. I made oatmeal the way my mother did when sadness visited, too much cinnamon, not enough sugar. In the quiet, I remembered a sentence from a donor lecture years ago when an art historian said, "Provenance is the story a piece tells about who held it and why they let it go." I had a new provenance now. I did not like its owners, but I could still choose how to describe what I carried next. What was mine to hold? What would I deliberately put down?
The next 2 weeks were a study in deliberate motion. Ethan sent 3 counselor options by email, as asked, with links and available times. I chose the earliest. The receptionist used a voice that belonged in a spa and a courtroom simultaneously. We took the slot and said we'd arrive 15 minutes early to complete paperwork, as if paperwork could neutralize a bruise. Ethan stayed at his brother's in West Asheville, a duplex with a balcony that overlooks a parking lot and a view of a billboard that tells you to repent. He texted me logistics. "Mail came. Do you need the blue folder?" And then once, "I miss you," which I did not answer. He called Arlo the sourdough feral in a photo because no one had fed it. I left a jar of flour and instructions on the porch. He picked them up without knocking. Mara went to work in therapy and once left me a bag of day-old croissants on the porch with a sticky note that said, "These used to fix things. I know they don't. Maybe breakfast." I ate one and cried over the sink, not because the pastry was sad, but because my body, at least, knew what to do with it. I retrieved my mother's boxes from the unit with a friend's help. We stacked them in my living room like a temporary exhibit. On a Sunday afternoon, I cut the tape and opened Mother Photos and spread the contents on the rug. There we were, 2 girls in matching dresses on a savannah porch, 2 teenagers with braces in a motel pool, 2 women at my wedding, one holding a bouquet, one holding a beer, both laughing. I lined up the photos in chronological order because it is how I make sense. Here is the girl who jumped fences. Here is the girl who jumped careers. Here is the girl who jumped at my husband in a dark room and then asked him to keep the secret as if secrets aren't acid. On the back of a Christmas photo, our mother had written in looping blue, "Girls, be kind to each other. The world is mean enough." I wanted to throw the card across the room and also frame it. In counseling, the therapist had the kind of office that tries to be a cabin, knotted wood table, wool blankets, a plant that might have been real. She had us say our names like an AA meeting, and then our goal for being there. Ethan said, "To tell the truth while being worthy of it." I said, "To figure out if forgiveness is a bridge I want to build." She nodded, like both were acceptable art statements. We didn't rehash every detail. We built a small scaffolding over the worst hole. Ethan said he had spent 2 weeks rehearsing a confession that ended with, "Please don't leave," and said the rehearsal turned into self-flagellation until it felt virtuous, which meant it was not. He apologized again, clean and without ornament. I said I was angry not only at the fact, but at the condescension of deciding what pain I could handle. He said he knew that now, and would have known it then if he had thought for another hour instead of another second. The therapist said we were using time as a weapon, and we should put it down. At the second session, the therapist asked us to write what we believed our marriage was before and what we believed it could be after. I wrote, "A museum where nothing changes for before," which was untrue and therefore revealing. For after, I wrote, "A house with better locks and more windows." Ethan wrote, "A trail with a bend I didn't see," then, "A place you choose to keep walking." He looked at me when he read that. I didn't look away. The third session, the therapist asked a question I had avoided. "What do you need from Mara to heal this?" I said, "To stop using me as the measure for her guilt, and to hold herself to the standards she holds other people to when they hurt her."
The therapist nodded like I had said something basic and profound, even added, "And for me to never be her first call when she's drowning, unless you explicitly ask me to be." I did not add anything else because sometimes the obvious is enough. At home, alone between sessions, I read my mother's recipe cards and made her pot roast on a Tuesday like a temporary spell. I wrote a letter to my younger self I didn't send. I watched the city below the overlook from my porch and acknowledged that people in those lights were making decisions at 2:07 a.m. they would regret by noon. 2 weeks stretched into 3. Ethan moved back into the house not because everything was fine, but because a house is not a storage unit. We hung a calendar on the fridge titled Check-ins and drew small boxes we could take turns filling with words like good, hurt, better, tired, unsure. It was childish, and also, it worked. Mara kept distance that was not punitive, but respectful. She texted updates that did not require a response. "I'm on week 3, she wrote once. "Therapist says I crack jokes when I'm about to cry. Who knew?" I typed, "Everyone," and didn't send it because I was trying to be a different kind of sister. She sent a photo of Mom's bedroom painting hung in her studio with sunlight on it, and I felt something in me unclench a degree. One night, after a session where Ethan said he had realized he liked being the hero and that scared him, he sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Do you still see us?" I thought about the mountain overlook, the circuit board city, the siren that faded, the voices we had used like tools. I said, "I see a bridge I might want to walk on." It was not a yes. It was not a no. It was a present tense. What was the cost of crossing? What was the cost of staying where I was?
On a Sunday that finally smelled like September, I carried my mother's last box to the curb for recycling, empty and flattened. The word papers half torn off, letters that meant nothing without contents. Ethan stood on the porch holding 2 mugs, one for me. In my pocket was the key to 8A that I would return tomorrow because we didn't need it anymore. We had decided to move what we kept into the light. Down the street, a neighbor's wind chimes found a tune. Somewhere behind our house, a train sounded a long, low horn, and I counted the beats between blasts like a child counting thunder. I took the mug, the hot weight of it honest in my hand, and looked at the windows we had opened, the locks we had replaced, the spaces we had named. I didn't forgive all at once. Forgiveness isn't an exhibit opening with champagne. It's labels, printed one at a time, applied with care, checked in morning light. As we stood on the porch, the air cool and newly gentle, I knew only this. I would keep walking until the bridge told me its true strength. And if it failed underfoot, I would already know the path down the bank, the way the river bends, and how to find my way home, alone.